Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is Technique Tuesday. In this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'm demonstrating knitting on. It's a very basic cast-on method. I'll be demonstrating two different ways of doing it and comparing the results of those. And I'll tell you the advantages and disadvantages of this particular cast-on and what situations you might want to use this cast-on. So let's get started. We start with the slip knot. You put the slip knot on your needle. And this is called knitting on because you are literally knitting the previous stitch that was put on the needle and then placing the new stitch back on the needle. So you're going to insert from front to back just like you were going to knit a stitch. If you knit with holding the yarn in your right hand, you're going to come around the back, around the needle like this, and then pull that stitch through. So now you have a new loop on the needle. The first way that this cast on can be done is by putting the loop on the left hand needle with the tips to tip so that that new stitch goes on the needle like that. And you take your right hand needle out and you reinsert it back into this needle or this stitch on the left hand needle. And once you have done that, then you can tighten up that loop a little bit. Don't tighten it up beforehand because it might be difficult to stick your needle back through it. And again, you can go around from back to front in between these two needles, pull it through that loop, and then stick it back on the needle. Now, if you hold the yarn in your left hand, you're still knitting this loop. You're just holding the yarn in your left hand, again going front to back, catching the yarn, pulling it through, putting it on your needle, and then waiting until you've put your right hand needle back in there before tightening it up. And you just continue this until you have as many stitches as you need. The second method is identical to the first one until it's time to put the new stitch on the needle. So you're going to knit this stitch, pull the loop through. Instead of putting it on the needle where you've got the tips facing each other, you're going to bring your left needle across the front so that you're coming into that loop from right to left like that. And then you can leave your needle in that loop. You don't have to take it out, and then you can just tighten it up. So again, you're going to knit it like this. Bring your left hand needle across so that it comes in from right to left, and then you can just bring your right hand needle behind and tighten this up. So let me show you that with the yarn in the right hand. You bring the yarn around for knitting, you pull it through, you bring the left hand needle across so that you're entering from right to left, and then you can tighten that up. And you just continue until you have the number of stitches that you need. So these are two ribbed swatches that I knit using the two methods. This blue one used the first method, where when I was passing the new loops over to the old needle, the tips of the needles were facing each other. And for this one, this is the one where I brought the left needle across in order to bring it through the loop, and then I was able to keep both needles in there in order to start the next stitch. So this is one where it's a little more convenient, perhaps, to do the cast on, at least for me, but they both are fine, and you can compare. So they look slightly different from each other, but so you can decide if you prefer one aesthetically over the other. Some of the advantages of a knitted cast on, and this is not unique to this particular cast on, but it is an advantage, is that you can start with a short tail. You don't have to measure out how much tail you need in order to knit this. You can knit the cast on edge as long as you want. It uses a single strand of yarn which means that if you need to cast on additional stitches at some point after the work is in progress, like sometimes at the beginning of a row or at the end of a row, you might have to cast on more stitches, or occasionally in the middle of a row, you have a single strand that you can that you're already working with, and you can just use that strand to cast on more stitches. One thing that you should know is that as you're working across a row or round of stitches, the working yarn is always hanging from the right hand needle. But in order to cast on stitches using the knitting on method, you have to turn the work so that that needle with the working yarn on it is now in your left hand. And at that point, you could cast on some more stitches, and then when you were done, you could turn the work back and continue on. Like if you were working in the round and you needed to keep working, or even if you're working flat and you still had more stitches on the left-hand needle, you could keep going. It's not a bulky cast on. It produces, a fairly narrow cast on edge. So if you need to create new stitches somewhere where you're also going to have to pick up along that edge later, there won't be much bulk on the inside of the work. And then another advantage is that this is considered to be a very stretchy cast on. Sometimes it's called the lace cast on because it works really well in lace projects that have to be really stretched, and so that the edge is very stretchy as well. We can take a look and see how stretchy this actually is. So this is ribbing. This is a 20 stitches. This is something that would, if it were in stockinette or if it was just flat, it would be 4.5 inches wide. But knitting can always stretch more than what it is when it's relaxed. And so these 20 stitches, running out of ruler there, can stretch to about 7 inches. This is the method 2 where you were inserting across the loop and you didn't have to take the needle out. This one is method 1, where the tips were pointed toward each other and you had to take the tip out. So for this one isn't going quite as far, and maybe I just cast on tighter, or maybe this one actually isn't as stretchy as the other one. So that's interesting. But I did an experiment with the long tail cast on, which a lot of people find can be really rigid. And it can be really rigid if you are casting on too tightly. You have control over it. So you can see from this edge, this is the smooth side of the cast on, that these are fairly large loops. And so I really built in a lot of stretch in this, and this is going past the 7-inch mark. So I deliberately made this edge stretchier, but it's obvious, it's a real obvious edge too. And this is an edge that has a right side and a wrong side. This is the smooth side, and this is the bumpy side. So those two edges look very different, where the knitting on, they look similar enough to each other that you'd be hard-pressed to say which is the right or wrong side. This is a long tail cast on, where I cast on in pattern, so that this is actually a reversible edge. Here it looks the same. You've got the smooth, slanted stitches below the knits, and you don't have any bumps going across the base of the knit stitches. So for this one, I also can go past the 7-inch mark. So you can make other cast-ons stretchy. Whether you personally can get this kind of result when you are comparing the different cast-ons is a different question. So I would say experiment with knitting on. If you are in a situation where you really need something stretchy and you can't get that with whatever cast-on method you've been using, try this to see if that might be something that gets you a better result, or just know that it can be in your toolbox when you need a cast-on method that has to be done later in the project. So what are the disadvantages of this cast-on method? Well, in some cases it's not terribly pretty, and it's not necessarily a stable cast-on. So it's very flexible and it's not bulky. There may be times when you need something that is more durable or that is just sturdier and doesn't stretch as much. And so this might not be the choice that you would want if you have a need for something that isn't so stretchy or that is more decorative or has more bulk to it. So it just depends on what it is you need for your project. Well, that's it for this week's Technique Tuesday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.